The old man's heart pounded in his chest like a drum solo. He didn't know how to feel. His mind was spinning. His hands were shaking. It all felt so surreal. Was this really happening? Mark had been an employee at THK Enterprises for nearly 30 years. He'd climbed the corporate ladder rung by rung, and now he was the right-hand man of the CEO, a position that came with lots of perks. He drove a sleek silver Audi, lived in a luxurious apartment, and his children were studying at prestigious universities. But Mark never forgot where he came from. He knew he would be where he was if it had not been for the support and trust of Thomas Hawthorne, the owner of the company. And while other employees saw their bosses cold, distant, and even ruthless, Mark knew there was more to him than met the eye. Over the years, Mark had seen firsthand how much Thomas cared about the company and its employees. He'd personally funded the education of underprivileged kids, donated millions to charities, and even bailed out struggling families. But recently, Thomas had been acting strangely. He often stayed late in the office and left early in the morning, which was odd since he was known for leaving promptly at 5 p.m. every day. One day, Mark couldn't take it anymore. He was curious about his boss and maybe a little worried. So after work, he decided to follow him. Mark drove around town trying to spot Thomas's black Bentley, but no matter where he went, he seemed to be a step behind him. Finally, when he reached a quiet neighborhood, he saw Thomas's car pull into a modest house. The sight shocked him. He knew his boss lived in a luxurious penthouse downtown, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the entire city. Why would he be visiting a house in the suburbs? Curiosity overwhelmed him, and Mark parked his car around the corner. He needed answers. He wanted to know what was going on. Peeking around the corner, he saw Thomas entering the house. There was a woman standing by the door, and Mark's heart skipped a beat. They were hugging, laughing, and it was clear they were a couple. This wasn't just a quick hello or goodbye. They were genuinely happy to see each other. A wave of relief washed over Mark. He was worried something might be wrong with his boss, but now he knew Thomas was simply spending time with someone he loved. Maybe that's why he'd been in such a good mood lately. But who was the woman? And why did she live in a house like this if she was dating the owner of THK Enterprises? As the days went by, Mark couldn't help but think about what he'd seen. He found himself smiling whenever he thought about Thomas and the mysterious woman. It was like a secret he was carrying, something that made his workdays brighter and his evenings more peaceful. But he knew he couldn't keep it to himself forever. He owed it to Thomas to tell him he was being followed. So one morning, he knocked on Thomas's office door and told him everything. To his surprise, Thomas wasn't angry or annoyed. Instead, he had a big smile on his face. "You found out?" he said, and Mark nodded, still feeling a bit awkward about spying on his boss. "It's Sarah," Thomas said, as if reading Mark's mind. "I haven't had the courage to tell anyone yet." He paused, then added, "She's my daughter." Mark's jaw dropped. All this time, he'd been wondering who the woman was, and the answer was right in front of him. He couldn't believe his eyes. Thomas's daughter. That explained the modest house, the lack of luxury cars. She probably didn't want to draw attention to herself. Looking at Thomas, Mark noticed something different in his eyes, something that made him realize his boss wasn't just a wealthy CEO. He was a loving father who probably hadn't seen his daughter in a long time. Mark suddenly understood why Thomas had been spending so much time at home. He wanted to be a good father to her, not just a rich guy who could buy her anything she wanted. "How long has this been going on?" Mark asked, and Thomas sighed. "A few months now," he said. "She moved back in with me after her divorce. I'm so happy she's back in my life, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I thought things would settle down after a while, but clearly they haven't." Mark nodded understandingly. He knew what it was like to keep secrets at work. Sometimes it felt like a burden, and he was glad he could help Thomas share that burden. Later that day, Mark bumped into Thomas in the hallway. "Say, boss," he said casually, "do you want some company tonight? You know, for dinner, or maybe a movie?" Thomas hesitated, surprised by the offer. Usually, Mark would never suggest something like this. "I'd like that," he said finally. "Thank you." Mark, at the restaurant, over plates of pasta and shared bottles of wine. They talked about everything except for Thomas's personal life. But Mark could see his boss relax and open up in a way he'd never seen before. After dinner, they walked along the river, and Thomas suddenly turned to Mark, a serious expression on his face. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" Mark asked, puzzled. "For caring, for being a good friend." Not everyone would have kept a secret like that. The next day at work, Mark couldn't stop smiling. He felt lighter, happier. It was amazing to see his boss in a different light, to know that the cold, distant CEO was actually a warm, loving father. In the weeks that followed, Mark often saw Thomas and his daughter leaving work together. They'd walk hand in hand, their laughter echoing through the halls. It was a beautiful sight. Mark couldn't help but smile whenever he saw them. He was happy for his boss, happy that he'd found a way to balance his personal life and his work. One Friday afternoon, Mark was working late when he heard a knock on his office door. He looked up to see Thomas standing there, a a sheepish grin on his face. "Want to join us for dinner tonight? Just the three of us," he said, extending an arm towards Mark. "We're going to this Italian place Sarah loved." Mark felt a warmth spread through his chest. It was an invitation to become part of Thomas and Sarah's family, and he accepted without hesitation. As they drove to the restaurant, Mark found himself laughing and joking with Thomas and Sarah. It felt so natural, so easy. He could tell that both Thomas and Sarah were grateful to have each other in their lives, and Mark was honored to be a part of that bond. During dinner, the conversation flowed. They talked about everything and nothing, and Mark learned more about Sarah and her plans for the future. He saw how much Thomas was listening, how attentive and supportive he was, and he realized that this wasn't just a father-daughter relationship. This was a friendship, a partnership built on trust, respect, and love. As the night drew to a close, Mark drove Thomas and Sarah back home. He watched as they got out of the car and walked towards their house, their figures silhouetted against the porch light. He saw Thomas put his arm around Sarah's shoulder, and for a moment, Mark felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. In the days that followed, Mark couldn't help but think about the evening before. He found himself smiling whenever he thought about Thomas and Sarah and the easy bond they shared. It was a beautiful thing to witness, and he was glad to be a part of their lives. And so, the unlikely trio of a wealthy CEO, his daughter, and his loyal employee continued to meet for dinner, for walks by the river, and for laughter echoing through the halls of THK Enterprises. Their story was a reminder that behind every successful person, there was a story of love, loss, and resilience.